The air in the small, dimly lit room crackled with tension. It was supposed to be a routine mission, an assignment that would barely make a dent in the grand scheme of things. But from the moment the alien girl stepped onto Earth, everything went horribly wrong. She had been trained, prepared, and briefed for the encounter. But nothing could have prepared her for the overwhelming sensation that now gripped her. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she staggered, clutching her chest. The skin on her body was flushed, heat rising in waves. It wasn't just discomfort, this was pain. Intense, unbearable heat seeping into her very core. Her alien physiology, designed for the icy expanse of her homeworld, wasn't built to handle Earth's climate or the strange forces this human had inadvertently triggered in her body. "Human," she gasped, her voice trembling with panic. "What are you doing to my body?" "I'm burning up." She stumbled back against the cold metal wall of the ship, trying to steady herself, but it was no use. The heat only intensified, spreading across her arms and legs, igniting every nerve, and making it impossible to focus. Sweat dripped from her brow, but it wasn't enough to cool the feverish blaze coursing through her veins. The human standing in front of her was staring at her with wide, confused eyes. He hadn't meant for any of this to happen. When he had volunteered to help the alien species, he hadn't expected the kind of physical response that was now unfolding. But there was nothing he could do. The tension in the room was suffocating, the silent chaos of their situation slowly unraveling with each second. She tried to steady her breathing, but the air was too thick. Earth's atmosphere was too different, too overwhelming. Her eyes locked onto the human, her expression filled with desperation. "Please," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "I don't understand. Why is this happening to me?" The human took a hesitant step forward, clearly unsure how to help. The alien girl was unlike anything he had ever encountered before. Her silvery skin shimmered in the dim light, the elongated shape of her body more graceful and elegant than any human form. But right now, none of that mattered. What mattered was the alien's pain, the intensity of what she was going through, and the fact that he seemed powerless to stop it. I don't know," he stammered, running a hand through his disheveled hair, looking at her with helpless concern. "I didn't mean to hurt you. This is. It's something I didn't even think was possible." She inhaled sharply, her chest rising and falling as the heat continued to surge. She tried to push through it, focusing on her surroundings, on anything other than the fire that seemed to consume her insides. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape it. The human's voice wavered, his concern growing with each passing moment. Maybe I can find a way to cool you down. I know Earth has some kind of temperature regulation tech. Or maybe I can." "No." The alien girl cut him off with a gasp, her hand shooting up to stop him. The very idea of Earth's methods was too foreign to her, too out of her control. She didn't know how her body would react to anything they might try. She needed to understand why this was happening, not just throw random solutions at it. The room seemed to close in on her, the heat unbearable as she fought to maintain some semblance of composure. Her mind raced through every bit of information she had been trained with. Her species was advanced, sophisticated even by the highest human standards, but they had never been prepared for something like this, an environment that didn't just affect their bodies, but seemed to assault them in ways they couldn't explain. "Why?" she gasped, her voice hoarse. "Why did I never know about this? Why wasn't I prepared for this kind of this?" The human didn't know how to answer. He wanted to say something comforting, something that could reassure her, but he was just as lost as she was. They had studied the alien species, but this was different. The physical response she was experiencing wasn't something in any of the reports or briefings. It wasn't something anyone had expected. The alien girl had come to Earth for peace, to learn, to communicate. But now it felt as if their very meeting was unraveling everything. The girl's eyes widened with realization, her thoughts spiraling. Could this be an effect of her proximity to the human? She remembered the fleeting reports she'd heard. Strange accounts of how humans had an uncanny influence on other species, triggering reactions that weren't supposed to happen. But nothing had prepared her for the sensations now flooding her senses. The human was still standing, frozen. He watched her with wide eyes, unsure of what to do. He had only wanted to help. But now, seeing the alien girl suffer like this, I'll do whatever I can, he said, his voice cracking with anxiety. Just tell me what to do, please. The alien girl's gaze softened, her breathing still shallow as she fought against the searing heat. There was a part of her, buried deep within the panic, that recognized the sincerity in his voice. He wasn't just an ordinary human. There was something in his eyes, something that told her he would do anything to help her. But she didn't know what was happening, didn't know how to stop it. In that moment, the world around them felt as if it was closing in. The human's face was filled with concern, but the alien girl's own fear was growing. Was this the beginning of something irreversible? Was there something fundamentally wrong with her? She couldn't be sure, but one thing was certain. If she didn't find a way to stop the fire burning through her, nothing would matter anymore. Her vision blurred with heat, the sensation pressing in on her from all sides. She could feel her body trembling, the air thick with a heavy tension neither of them knew how to break. And then, just as she was about to collapse, something changed. There was a strange pulse, a feeling of connection, a surge of energy that rippled through the air. The alien girl's eyes snapped open in surprise. What was that? Was it coming from the human? Wait, she cried, suddenly feeling the shift. What are you doing? But the human only stood there, his eyes locked onto hers, his face a mixture of uncertainty and determination. Something was happening, something neither of them could explain. And that's when it hit her. This wasn't just an ordinary problem. It was something deeper, something connected to the very nature of humans, something no alien had ever encountered before. And now, she had to figure out how to navigate it before it consumed her entirely. Human, what are you doing to my body? She gasped once more, the heat still surging inside her, only now it felt different, more intense, more dangerous. The alien girl's body trembled violently as the strange pulse intensified. It was as if something deep within her was responding, but she couldn't make sense of it. The human stood motionless, his eyes locked on her with a mixture of confusion and growing concern. His presence was like a magnetic force, pulling her in, but simultaneously pushing her away, adding to the bewildering sensations coursing through her. Human, she gasped again, her voice barely a whisper. What are you doing to me? The heat that had previously been unbearable now seemed to shift, fluctuating with an intensity she couldn't explain. It wasn't just her body that was reacting. It was as if every nerve in her being was lighting up, reacting to the strange energy in the air. Her head spun as she tried to focus on the human's words, but all she could feel was the burn, the heat, the pull. For a moment, the human stepped back, uncertain. His hand hovered nervously at his side as if he was afraid to make any sudden movements. I'm not doing anything, he said, his voice shaking. I didn't mean to make this happen. I... I don't know what's going on. The alien girl clenched her fists, fighting against the rising panic. This wasn't just some physical reaction to Earth's environment. It was something far deeper. She had felt it the moment they had met, an undeniable connection between them. But now, it seemed that connection was more than just a passing feeling. It was as though her body was being drawn into something larger, something incomprehensible, and she couldn't stop it. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she stumbled forward, her body almost swaying as if it were no longer under her control. The heat continued to pulse, now wrapping itself around her chest, threatening to suffocate her. "Please, I don't understand," she cried, her voice cracking. "I wasn't prepared for this." The human looked torn, desperate to do something, anything, to help. He took a cautious step forward, his brow furrowed in concentration. "What do you mean?" "I don't know what's happening, but maybe if I could." The alien girl's eyes widened as a new realization hit her. The human's proximity. His very presence seemed to be a catalyst, amplifying the sensation coursing through her. She recoiled instinctively, as though his touch might push her further into whatever strange state she was in. I need to get away from you," she muttered under her breath, but the words felt empty. Every part of her, every instinct, told her to retreat, to pull back. But the pull of the energy between them was too strong, and she couldn't escape. The human hesitated, looking at her with confusion and guilt. "I don't want to hurt you. I didn't know this would happen." The alien girl wanted to respond, to explain that it wasn't his fault, but words failed her. The heat surged again, and this time it wasn't just her body reacting, it was her mind too. Strange visions flickered at the edges of her consciousness, flashes of things she couldn't understand, memories she had never lived. Earth, her species, humans, a connection that spanned eons, a bond that no one had ever told her about. Her body shook with the intensity of the visions, and she stumbled once more, trying to stay grounded. "I don't know what this is," she whispered, "but I feel it. Like it's all tied together." The human watched her, his face tight with concern. He was beginning to understand that this wasn't just an isolated reaction to the planet's atmosphere. There was something far deeper, something inexplicable happening here. Something that tied her to him, to Earth, in ways neither of them could explain. She took another staggered breath, her voice growing quieter, almost as though she were speaking to herself. "I've heard stories, old myths, about how humans, how your species could create reactions in others. But I never thought." She trailed off, the words slipping away as the heat began to climb again, faster now, like a wave crashing over her. "I didn't know," she finished softly, her voice barely audible. The human was silent, absorbing her words. His mind was racing, trying to process everything that was happening. He had read about the potential of human influence, how, according to some fringe theories, humans had a unique ability to affect other species on a biochemical level. But this was something completely different. This wasn't some minor influence. It was an overwhelming force that seemed to be tied directly to the alien girl's physical and mental state. "Look, we need to figure this out," he said, his voice steadying as his concern shifted to determination. "Whatever's happening to you, I'm going to help you. I promise." The alien girl shook her head, still fighting the intense heat. "I don't think you understand," she whispered, almost as though she were trying to convince herself as much as him. "I don't know what this is, but every moment, every second, I feel it pulling at me. And it's getting worse." The human took a slow, deliberate step toward her. "I'm not leaving you." We'll find a way to fix this. His resolve gave her a brief moment of clarity. She had to trust him, or at least let him try. She had never encountered anything like this in her life, but there was something in his eyes, something raw and genuine, that made her believe he wanted to help. And yet, there was still a part of her, an instinctive part that warned her not to get too close. The connection between them was undeniable, but it was also unpredictable, dangerous even. Every fiber of her being screamed to stay away, to protect herself from whatever this force was, whatever it was doing to her. I can feel it in every part of me, she said, her voice hoarse. But it's not just my body that's changing. My mind is... She hesitated, shaking her head. I'm seeing things that don't make sense. I don't know what's happening. The human watched her carefully, his mind struggling to catch up. Whatever this was, it was beyond anything he had ever studied or imagined. He couldn't help but feel that it was more than just a scientific anomaly. It was a part of something much larger, something neither of them could control. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly as he got closer to her. I'm here, all right. You're not alone. We'll figure this out. But as his hand neared her, the alien girl felt a strange tug within herself, a deep, instinctual pull to draw him in. The energy was growing stronger. It wasn't just the heat now. It was everything. It was the pull between them, the connection that felt so ancient and deep. She didn't know if she was ready for it, but she couldn't ignore it anymore. Something's happening, she murmured, her breath catching. Something beyond what we understand. The human stepped closer, his brow furrowed with determination. We'll figure it out. Together. The moment stretched between them, the tension building as the energy swelled in the air, thickening with every passing second. Whatever was happening, neither of them could stop it. The air in the room felt charged, as if it were thick with something invisible yet undeniably powerful. The human and the alien girl stood only a few feet apart, their gazes locked, the tension between them palpable. The heat that had been unbearable moments ago had now turned into a crackling pulse, an energy that seemed to surge with every heartbeat. She could feel it in her chest, in her very bones, a relentless wave of force threatening to overwhelm her. And with each passing moment, it only seemed to grow stronger. The alien girl's mind was a swirl of confusion. Her alien senses, so finely tuned to the environments of distant planets, couldn't make sense of Earth's air, its gravity, its atmosphere. But what she couldn't explain away was the energy that seemed to emanate from the human, pulling at her, tugging on her very soul. She had known that humans had a peculiar influence on other species, but this felt different, more intense, like something ancient was awakening within her. Her breathing came faster now, her pulse racing as she fought to maintain control. What is this? She whispered to herself, her hands trembling at her sides. She wanted to reach out, but something deep inside her was warning her to stay away. The closer she got to the human, the more it felt like the world around them was warping. She could feel her own body rebelling against her, every nerve alive with energy, but the source of that energy, that pull, remained just out of reach. The human, still watching her with an intensity that matched her own, took another step forward, but this time the alien girl recoiled. A sharp gasp escaped her lips as the heat flared up again, a flash of light blinding her vision for an instant. The world seemed to spin, and for a brief moment, she thought she might lose herself in the surge of sensation. No, she whispered desperately, her voice barely audible. I can't lose control. I can't let it take over. Her chest tightened, her skin almost glowing with the intensity of the energy coursing through her veins. She could feel her body responding, a strange mix of fear and curiosity flooding her senses. What was this connection? What was happening to her? She was no longer sure if she could trust her own instincts. But as her mind raced, a different thought took hold. Maybe this was what she had been searching for all along. The human took a careful step closer, his voice low and filled with concern. It's okay, he said, though there was a tremor in his tone. I'm not going to hurt you, but we need to figure this out, together. Her breath hitched as his words reached her. There was something about them that struck a chord deep inside her, something that resonated with the growing energy between them. For a moment, she wondered if it was possible for two beings from completely different worlds to understand each other on this level. But even as she thought it, the feeling of dread crept back. There was no escaping the force pulling her in, no running from the heat that now surrounded her. I don't know if I can control it anymore, she admitted, her voice quivering. The fear she felt wasn't just physical. She was afraid of what this energy could do to both of them. What if it tore them apart? What if it was too much for either of them to handle? She looked up at the human, her eyes filled with the silent plea for help. What if we can't stop this? His gaze softened, but there was still that underlying tension. He was just as unsure as she was, just as frightened of what would happen next. But something in her words seemed to reach him. He took another step forward, closing the distance between them. The alien girl could feel it, now the pressure building. The energy in the room so thick, it was suffocating. She could no longer tell where her body ended and his influence began. And then, as if something had finally snapped, the pulse of energy surged violently. The alien girl gasped as the heat exploded within her, a wave of fire burning through every inch of her body. Her vision blurred as the sensation reached a peak. She staggered back, unable to keep her footing, but the human was there, his hand reaching out to catch her before she fell. The moment his fingers brushed against her arm, the energy between them seemed to explode in a flash of light, blinding them both. The world around them seemed to vanish in an instant, swallowed by the blinding white glow. The alien girl's heart pounded in her chest, her thoughts scattered as the overwhelming force consumed her entirely. For what felt like an eternity, the light enveloped them, a feeling of weightlessness taking over. Time seemed to stretch, her mind floating in a sea of confusion and disorientation. The human's presence was still there, but she couldn't tell if it was his touch that was keeping her grounded or if it was something else altogether. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the light dimmed and the heat subsided. The room returned to normal, the oppressive air lifting as though the very weight of the moment had been released. But even in the calm that followed, the alien girl could feel something inside her had changed. She took a shaky breath, trying to steady herself, but her body still felt strange, alive with energy, yet exhausted. She looked at the human, her eyes wide with disbelief. What just happened? She whispered, her voice barely audible. The human didn't answer right away. He was still staring at her, as if trying to make sense of the impossible. For a moment, there was silence, an unnerving stillness that hung in the air. But then, he slowly stepped back, his hands trembling. I don't know, he finally said, but whatever this is, it's not over. Her stomach twisted as his words sank in. What had they just unleashed? The connection between them had grown so powerful, so overwhelming, that it felt as if it had cracked something wide open, something neither of them could control. She could still feel the pull, faint but unmistakable, urging her to stay near him, to stay close. But there was more, something darker, something they hadn't anticipated. The alien girl's heart raced, a knot of fear tightening in her chest. It wasn't just the energy. It was the strange sense of destiny that hung over them both. She could feel it now, tugging at her, beckoning her forward. "There's more," she whispered, almost to herself. "This isn't just some accident. It's a part of something much bigger." The human's expression darkened as he looked at her, realizing the gravity of her words. Whatever was happening wasn't just an isolated event. Something deep was unfolding, and it was far from over. The connection they had triggered was only the beginning, and they both knew it. The room seemed to grow colder, the air thick with the promise of what was to come. Neither of them knew exactly what it was, but they could feel it. Something was shifting, and with it, the uncertainty grew. "Stay close," the human said softly, his voice serious now. "We need to find out what's really going on." The alien girl nodded, her gaze hardening as she steadied herself. Whatever had just happened, it had changed everything. The real mystery had just begun, and neither of them was ready for what lay ahead. The alien girl's heart pounded in her chest as she steadied herself, her eyes never leaving the human. There was something in the air now, something heavier than before. The tension had escalated, crackling like static in the atmosphere, as though the very fabric of reality had shifted around them. They were no longer just two beings in a room. They were participants in something much larger, something they couldn't yet comprehend. "I'm not sure what just happened," the human muttered, glancing around nervously. "But I feel like we've triggered something. Something we shouldn't have." The alien girl nodded slowly, her breath still uneven as she tried to calm herself. The pull, the connection between them, was still there, but now it felt more dangerous, like a force they couldn't control. She glanced down at her hands, the faintest glow still emanating from her skin. The energy was still there, humming under the surface, waiting to break free again. She could feel it stirring, alive and restless. "I don't think it's just us anymore," she said, her voice quiet but tense. Her gaze flicked nervously to the door, as if expecting something or someone to appear at any moment. The human frowned, looking around the room as though searching for answers that weren't there. "What do you mean?" Before she could answer, a sudden tremor shook the ground beneath them, a low rumble that vibrated through the walls. The alien girl staggered, her knees buckling slightly as the energy inside her surged violently. The human reached out instinctively to steady her, but as his hand brushed against her arm, the heat flared up again, more intense than before. She gasped, her body almost convulsing as the sensation overwhelmed her. "What is happening to me?" she whispered in panic, her voice trembling. The pulse was growing, expanding, and with it came a strange, almost primal feeling, a sensation of something ancient, something hidden just beneath the surface of her own being. The human, unable to ignore the growing intensity, backed away slightly, his face full of concern and confusion. "Whatever this is, it's not just you. It's us. We're connected, I think. But it's like we've awoken something we weren't supposed to." The alien girl's head spun with the implication of his words. Could it be? Was it possible that their connection, the force binding them together, had triggered something beyond their control? Was there more to the strange surge of energy than just her own biology reacting to the human presence? And then, as if to confirm her suspicions, a distant sound echoed from deep within the building, a hollow, metallic thrum that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. The alien girl's eyes widened. She knew that sound. It was the sound of a door, one that had been locked for years, one that had remained untouched. And now it was opening. The human turned to her, a confused look in his eyes. What was that? What's going on? The alien girl's breath caught in her throat. They found us. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but the gravity of her words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Her mind raced, memories flooding back, fragments of information she had learned long ago, things she had been taught to forget. The stories of her people, of a power greater than even the strongest species could imagine. A power hidden, locked away for eons, never meant to be disturbed. But now they had disturbed it. And whatever it was coming for them. A chill swept through the room, freezing the air around them. The alien girl stepped back, her senses on high alert as she scanned the room, searching for any sign of movement. She could feel it now, the pressure, the sense that something was closing in on them. It wasn't just the building itself. It was something else. Something much older, much more dangerous. "We need to leave," she said urgently, her voice sharp with fear. Now, the human's expression was a mix of confusion and hesitation. "Leave? What's going on? What's coming?" She didn't have time to explain. The ground trembled again, stronger this time, and she grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the door. Her mind raced, but no words could form. There was no time for questions, no time to reason with him. She had to get them both out of here. Whatever had been awakened, whatever force was hunting them now, it wouldn't stop until it had them. The human stumbled behind her, clearly still grappling with the enormity of what was unfolding. "Wait, you said who's coming? Who's after us?" But the alien girl couldn't answer. The air around them thickened, and the faint hum she'd been feeling earlier had now turned into a full-blown vibration, reverberating through the walls and floor. She could hear it now, the unmistakable sound of something or someone moving through the building, closing in on them with unnatural speed. A series of loud bangs echoed from down the hallway, and the alien girl's heart skipped a beat. She knew that sound, too. It was the unmistakable noise of heavy boots, of soldiers trained, relentless. They had found her, and now they would do anything to capture her, to harness the power that had been awakened within her. "No," she said, almost choking on the word. "We don't have time. We have to move, now." With no time to think, the alien girl shoved open the door, her hands trembling as she stepped into the hallway. The human followed, his eyes wide with confusion and fear, but there was no time to explain. There was no time for anything but survival. As they ran, the alien girl's mind raced. Who had found them? Who were these soldiers? They weren't from Earth. She knew that much. And if they had located her, if they were tracking the energy pulse she had unleashed, then they would stop at nothing to capture her, to control what she had triggered. But there was something else, something darker that had been set in motion. Something more than just soldiers. The pulse, the energy between her and the human wasn't just a reaction anymore. It was evolving, growing stronger, shifting in ways she couldn't understand. The deeper she tried to look into it, the more she realized whatever they had unleashed, it was beyond their comprehension. And now it was coming for them. The alien girl's pulse quickened as they sprinted through the hallways. The faint vibrations still trembled through the floor beneath her, a constant reminder that the pulse was growing stronger. It wasn't just her senses that were on edge. The very air around them felt thick, as if something far more dangerous and ancient was awakening. They turned a corner, running blindly, adrenaline fueling their movements. The human was struggling to keep up, his breath shallow, his confusion and fear visible on his face. But she couldn't stop. Not now. Every instinct screamed at her to keep moving, to stay ahead, to outrun whatever was closing in on them. As they passed a set of darkened rooms, the distant sound of footsteps echoed louder, much too close now. Her heart hammered in her chest as she glanced over her shoulder. Through the dimly lit corridor, the figures of several soldiers emerged from the shadows, their movements swift, purposeful. "They're coming," she said, barely more than a whisper. The human's face drained of color as he followed her gaze. "Who are they? What do they want with you?" The alien girl's mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle. She had hoped she could keep her identity hidden, that her origins would remain unknown. But it seemed she had underestimated the reach of those who hunted her kind. These soldiers weren't Earthborn. They were something else, something darker, something that had crossed galaxies in pursuit of a power they could not control. "We have to keep moving," she said, her voice sharp with urgency. "These people, they're not who they appear to be." Another tremor rocked the floor, this one far more violent, knocking both of them off balance. The ground beneath them buckled, causing the walls to crack, and a terrible screeching noise filled the air, as though something ancient and powerful had stirred to life beneath them. The alien girl's instincts kicked in. She grabbed the human by the arm, yanking him forward as the corridor ahead buckled, splitting apart as a section of the building collapsed under the pressure. They barely managed to avoid being trapped as the ceiling above them caved in, sending debris raining down. Dust choked the air, and the echoes of the soldiers' footsteps were drowned by the sound of their collapsing surroundings. "We need to find shelter," she gasped, her voice tight with strain as she pulled him down another hallway, hoping to outrun the devastation. The air was thick with panic now, the tension unbearable. They had to move faster. But the deeper they went into the building, the more she realized something was wrong. It wasn't just the soldiers that were closing in on them. Whatever had been triggered, whatever dormant power had been unleashed, was making its way toward them, and it wasn't something she could control. The energy pulsing between them had grown wild, uncontrollable, as though it was aware of their fear, feeding off it. "Where are we going?" the human asked, voice trembling with frustration. His eyes darted nervously as they ran, as if searching for an answer that neither of them had. The alien girl didn't have an answer. All she knew was that they had to reach the old containment chamber. It was a long shot, but it was the only place where the power could be temporarily contained if they could reach it before whatever had awakened fully manifested. The containment chamber had been designed to house dangerous energy sources. Maybe, just maybe, it could hold whatever was growing inside her. But as they neared the chamber's location, she could feel it. The pull, the call. The power was drawing them closer, and with every step they took, it was becoming more difficult to resist. The walls around them seemed to close in, the air growing heavier, as if something was rising from beneath the floor, something that had been slumbering for far too long. Suddenly, there was a loud crash, and the sound of boots striking the ground grew louder again. The soldiers were closer than ever. The alien girl could feel their eyes on her, their pursuit relentless. And as they rounded another corner, the familiar glowing symbols of the containment chamber came into view. But it wasn't just the chamber that lay ahead. Standing in front of it, illuminated by the flickering lights, was something else. Something human. A man stood there, his face half obscured by a mask, his posture rigid and commanding. He looked at them with cold, calculating eyes, as if he'd been expecting their arrival. And in his hands, he held a device something alien, unlike anything she had seen before, but unmistakably designed to restrain power like hers. "Stop," the man said, his voice deep and authoritative. "You've come far enough." The alien girl's heart dropped. She had been hoping they could reach the chamber, but now it seemed that hope was slipping through her fingers. The human beside her seemed just as stunned, his confusion growing by the second. "Who are you?" the human demanded, his voice sharp with panic. The man tilted his head slightly, as though amused by the question. "I am one who has been waiting for you. For both of you. We knew this day would come." The alien girl's blood ran cold. You knew about me? About this power?" He nodded slowly. "We've been tracking it for centuries. The connection between you two. You were never meant to understand what you've become." The soldier's words hit her like a blow, but the truth of it settled in quickly. The connection, the energy, everything she had felt wasn't just some random accident. It had been planned. She was nothing more than a pawn in a game she hadn't even known existed. Before she could react, the man stepped forward, raising the device in his hand. The air seemed to crackle with energy, and the alien girl could feel the temperature drop sharply. The device hummed to life, sending a pulse through the room. Her instincts screamed at her to run, to fight, but the human beside her was already falling to his knees, the pulse hitting him with an intensity she hadn't expected. The power was overwhelming, far stronger than anything she had felt before. And in that moment, she realized the truth. Whatever they had unleashed, whatever connection had been sparked between them, it had become something far more dangerous than either of them could have ever imagined. And the man in front of them was just the beginning of something much worse. The stakes had escalated. The pulse of energy sent shockwaves through the room, and the air around them felt like it was thickening, stretching taut as if reality itself were being pulled apart. The alien girl's heart pounded in her chest, and she could feel the oppressive weight of the device the masked man held, its hum vibrating in her very bones. The human beside her struggled, his face contorting in pain as the energy from the device coursed through him. He was on his knees now, gasping for breath, the light in his eyes dimming with every second that passed. The alien girl's first instinct was to move, to stop the man from using whatever this device was. But the power emanating from it was unlike anything she'd ever felt before. It was too strong, too concentrated. "Don't fight it," the man said, his voice cold and calm as if they were simply pawns in his game. "This has been a long time coming. You've unlocked something ancient, something powerful. The connection between you and him, it's not just an accident. It's fate." The alien girl felt her blood run cold. Fate. What did he mean by that? She had never believed in destiny. She had always been taught that her kind was meant to remain in the shadows, unseen and unheard. But now, in the face of this terrible truth, it was as if the entire world had shifted, revealing a power far greater than either she or the human could have anticipated. "Who are you?" she demanded, trying to steady her shaking hands as she reached for the human, but the pulse from the device kept her at bay. It was as if an invisible barrier surrounded them, pushing her back, making it impossible to reach him. The man's lips curled into a faint smile, but it was the kind of smile that sent a chill straight down her spine. "I am someone who's been waiting for this day, for you to awaken the power, for you to realize what you've become." She struggled to understand, but before she could ask any more questions, the man continued, his voice low but firm. "You're part of something much bigger. Your connection to him isn't a fluke. It's the key to something I've been hunting for, something that could shift the balance of the universe itself. His words hit her like a wave. Everything she had known, everything she had believed, was suddenly in question. The pull she felt toward the human, had it always been like this? Was it just an accident, or was there more to it? She had been terrified of what the connection between them could mean, but this was something else entirely. "You've been using me," she said through gritted teeth, her eyes narrowing as the fury built inside her. "You knew what I was all along." The man nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving her. "Yes, I knew exactly what you were. And now that you've activated the power between you, there's no going back. You think you can resist it, but you can't. It's already inside you. Inside both of you." The alien girl's mind was spinning. The human beside her, gasping for air, was slowly fading, slipping under the pull of the energy. His face was pale, his body trembling with each pulse from the device. She had to do something. She couldn't let him die, not like this. But as she stepped forward, her hands reaching out instinctively, the world around them shifted once again. A sudden rush of wind blew through the room, and the walls around them seemed to pulse with life, almost as if they too were reacting to the growing energy. Her heart raced in time with the pulsing power, and then something unexpected happened. The power she had been fighting to control, this strange, chaotic force between her and the human, surged outward, pushing against the man with the device. It was as if the very energy that had awakened inside her now turned against him, rejecting the force he was trying to impose. The device in his hand flickered, then sputtered, as if it was being overwhelmed by an energy it couldn't contain. "No," the man shouted, struggling to keep control as sparks flew from the device. "This isn't supposed to happen. You can't." But it was too late. The energy was too powerful, too uncontrollable. With a final, violent surge, the device exploded, sending a shockwave of power rippling through the room. The alien girl shielded her eyes from the blast, feeling the intense pressure of the force pushing against her. When the dust finally settled, she opened her eyes to find the man gone, his presence completely erased by the force of the explosion. She turned to the human, her heart skipping a beat as she saw him lying motionless on the floor. Panic surged through her, and she rushed to his side, her hands trembling as she checked for any sign of life. For a moment, there was nothing. She held her breath, her mind racing with dread. But then, a soft cough broke through the silence. The human stirred, his eyes fluttering open, and he let out a slow breath, disoriented but alive. The alien girl let out a relieved sigh, her chest tightening as she helped him sit up. You're okay," she whispered, her voice a mix of disbelief and relief. He blinked up at her, still trying to process what had just happened. I don't understand." "What just—" "We did it," she interrupted softly, her voice barely a whisper. "We stopped him." The human's expression was still one of confusion, but something in his eyes had shifted. The bond they shared, the connection between them, was still there, still pulsing faintly beneath the surface. It was undeniable now, and she knew that whatever this power was, whatever it had awakened in them, it wasn't something they could ignore anymore. But as the silence stretched between them, she felt a new weight settle over her, a sense of finality. The immediate danger had passed, but the repercussions of everything that had just unfolded were far from over. The balance of the universe had been altered, and now they had to deal with the aftermath of what they had unleashed. The alien girl looked at the human beside her, knowing that their lives would never be the same. There was no going back to the way things had been. And although she didn't yet understand the full scope of what had happened, she knew that the connection they shared was not just a random accident. It was something far greater than either of them. "We need to leave," she said quietly, her voice steadying as she helped him to his feet. "There's still much we don't understand, and we can't stay here." The human nodded, though he still seemed dazed by everything that had happened. Where will we go? She didn't have an answer, but she knew they had to keep moving, keep searching for answers. Whatever had been triggered between them was just the beginning. And together, they would face whatever came next. As they left the building, the air around them seemed to crackle with energy, a reminder of what they had awakened and the unknown future they were now bound to. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. They were no longer just survivors. They were part of something much larger, something that would shape the universe in ways they couldn't even begin to comprehend. And together, they would face whatever challenges awaited them.